That was Palm Springs off to the right there, and I pan on over towards Indio and the Salton Sea. We were there on a pretty fair, clear day. I've seen a number of complaints that the air pollution from the coast comes in and hides some things. I didn't realize how clear it was till looking at the Salton Sea here. I decided to zoom out a little bit, and I noticed kind of off to the right out here, you can just barely see a mountain. If my information is correct, that's Signal Mountain, and it is in Mexico. That's how far we're seeing is clear to Mexico. I didn't get a good picture of our campsite in the Jumbo Rocks campground until this little fellow came along after we'd got the tent set up. We were trying to blow up the air mattress using a cord from the inverter in the truck. The ground there really surprised me because rather than being dirt or sand like I'm used to, it was little bits of the eroded granite that make up the Jumbo Rocks that the Jumbo Rock campground is in the middle of there. The first night was nice and clear. This looks like we had a full moon, but in a minute I'll show you a better picture of it. I started experimenting with my DSLR and tried to get some good views. Eventually I got to where I got a view like that of the moon. It was almost to, I believe, the first quarter, about half of the moon. Then I pointed the camera in another direction away from the moon and saw Orion up there. But it took me quite a few tries and some experimenting to get this view that shows all of Orion. And it was a long enough time lapse that you can see where an airplane was flying across the bottom of the picture there. This is a dark skies park. I'd really like to go there sometime when the moon is new. Okay, we went on a hike through Hidden Valley, and this is almost up to the entrance of the valley, but I'm looking out over the broader valley, and you can see some Joshua trees and how they grow out there. But this is the trail. For a couple of older folks like us, it was kind of a fun challenge without being too much. We just had to stop and catch our breath every once in a while. But here I am. I don't have a nice GoPro. I have to hand hold my my Canon video camera. But again, it's the trail is all sorts of little bits of the eroded granite. But that's what the trail looks like, and this is the beginning of Hidden Valley. You can see some Joshua trees there, but also a little bit here, I believe those are junipers or pinyon. There are some later on that I'm sure are pinyon, which made me feel almost at home with the Utah deserts because that's what they're full of. Oftentimes I'll put music to my videos, but this one I chose not to, in hopes that you could just hear the silence as we got further down the trail and away from some people that you hear once in a while. So I left the music out and just I'm just showing the video. In here you can see again some of the the lack of Joshua trees. There is some yucca like right there in front, and there are a few Joshua trees, but there are more and more pinyon and juniper trees. One of the signs called it a remnant forest that is in this hidden valley. They called it Hidden Valley because people would bring cattle in here and turn them loose to graze and not have to fence it. It was naturally fenced by the cliffs around it. Right there is a fairly tall pinyon that's there in Hidden Valley. Then again, as we get down in here more, I just was looking. Those darn junipers and pinyons, they'll try and grow right out of the rock. And I don't remember seeing any Joshua trees doing that. So I don't know if this is a remnant or if it's a new forest coming in colonizing, but it's kind of limited just to this one little valley here. Again, I'm trying to show a little bit what the trail was like, but this was, as you can see, we're still going down. This is just about where we bottomed out. And the trail had turned direction a little bit, but in just a moment here you'll see as I come here, the bend in the trail that sends it back towards the entrance into the valley. You do want to wear some good shoes if you take this hike or walk. We saw some people in flip-flops and I just was like, what's going on with their feet? And just a moment ago you could hear some voices. I was looking all over for them. And right here you'll see a guy rappelling down one of the rocks. And then I zoom in to take a look at the top, and there's a guy there at the top. There's a lot of rock climbing goes on here. That face had a special name, and now I can't remember it, that people really like. But there is some problems being caused by them leaving the trail, and so some of the rock climbing groups are working with their members and the National Park Service to try and keep rock climbing from being banned, but then also being sensitive to not causing damage to the ecosystem as they go over to it. A little bit later you'll see a little bit better view of some people on some of the cliffs doing some rock climbing. Yeah. Now, as we're going this direction, you end up climbing in a much shorter distance than what it took us to come down. we followed the arrow that said loop trail. You may want to go the opposite direction. There were people going that way. And then you'd be going down this part instead of having to climb this. But it worked fine for us going the direction the arrow pointed. And they've built steps in here out of slabs of the granite to make it more like climbing a stairway. Now through here is where I could hear some other people talking, and you'll notice right up there is somebody up on top, and there's somebody on the ground they were talking back and forth to. But we kept hearing French, and lo and behold, right here was a group of French tourists that were also enjoying taking some pictures and some things here. But there is rock climbing goes on in this valley.
Go. Then.
A little later we went on what's called the Geology Tour Road. We met up with this little guy when we stopped to get out and stretch our legs a little bit and see if I couldn't get some video of where we'd been. We had gotten a pamphlet, sort of a little booklet that explained much of the geology that you can see here. So this was really quite an interesting little self-guided tour. And you can see we came clear across that valley from way up there and across this flatter area. Here's an old dry lake bed. There's totally different kind of vegetation growing there, probably similar to what you might see in some of the Utah desert that has collected a lot of salt in it as well. These two cones here are basalt. They're volcanic cones that have come up through. But then these jumbled piles of rock are this, I keep calling it granite, but I think it's called an anzogranite. It's kind of like the granite I'm used to that has come up through. And that's part of why it's all just a jumble of rocks where they've broken apart. Then on top there's this darker gneiss that used to cover the whole area and has eroded away over much of the park, but right here on this one ridgeline you can see the dark gneiss. We decided to drive down into the other part of the park where it's lower in its Sonoran Desert. Along the way we passed this cholla cactus garden and decided to stop and take a look at that. Things are just right for this teddy bear jumping cholla to grow. It comes up the stalk, and the new growth forms these joints that are easily broken off, and that's why they call them jumping. But some people think they look like teddy bears, but you don't want to get one of those spines in you. They've got little barbs on them, and they'll stay with you. There are some animals that are able to work around there with them. One is a wood rat that makes nests. This was the first example of the nest in the little walk around, but there's a better one later on where you can see that there are joints of this cholla cactus around it, kind of helping protect it and actually insulating it a little bit. When they die, the inside part helps to provide habitat for some birds and some things like that as well. So kind of like the Joshua trees. They keep providing all sorts of stuff for the animal life there. Now, this is a little clump of some other form. It just doesn't look like the others. And the pamphlet said there was some silver cholla in here. So I wonder if that one isn't a silver cholla. It's not nearly as tall. It doesn't look as fuzzy. It's just kind of smaller there and all together. Um, we're going to look now at this one of the taller ones that I saw as I was walking around. And you see down near the bottom there's some of the joints that have fallen off. There's some joints still growing on this thing, but there around that bush is one of those wood rat nests. I don't know if the bush came first or the nest came first, but it's right there. The bush and the wood rat are kind of helping each other out a little bit too. Here's a more open wood rat nest, and you can see a few joints of the cholla around it, and some of the things like that that were growing there. The animals and the plants are suited to this habitat. But that one, I don't see any live on that one, so I don't know if it's going to continue or not. But many of these have some fresh joints growing on them, as well as some flowers. Here's a still picture from my DSLR of some of the flowers. The pamphlet, though, says that these flowers create seeds that are usually sterile. That almost all of the reproduction of these cholla is done through the joints, which means basically that they're all clones. I don't know how many individuals there are here, but not very many. All the new ones, or most of the new ones at least, are clones from these existing plants. We then went down to Cottonwood Spring, which is an oasis down near the southern entrance to the park. It wasn't much of a walk from the parking lot, so we went over to see what an oasis looks like. I have since found out this one started as like a spring there, and there was a palm tree, and the teamsters that were coming through there with wagons planted a few cottonwoods to try and add some more shade, but the palms themselves are now adding quite a bit of shade, though I didn't see any water, so they might be taking everything from the spring. I'm not sure. But you can see how dark it is back in the middle of all those trees. It would be wonderful to go back in there on a hot day. I'll bet it's probably 10-15 degrees cooler than out here on the rest. They were the strangest looking palms I'd ever seen. I didn't realize that you need to cut the fronds off of palms and then clean them up. So right here is a still from my DSLR where I went, oh, that's the palm trunk in there. And the palm trees I'm used to seeing around places like Phoenix and stuff when I visited there have had the fronds cut off, and some of them have even been cleaned up from this state. There is some indication of Native Americans using the area in the form of grinding some seeds of some sort in. Actually, there were two holes like this here in these rocks. That ended our time at Cottonwood Springs, and we got back to the truck just about sunset. We then drove back and had to leave the next day. So this is some of what we learned and what we saw when we visited Joshua Tree National Park.